Jason Pack, and this is Disorder, a show where we don't pretend that the sky isn't falling, and where sometimes just so catatonic, we can't hide it. Oh my God. I have thought that this was going to be a reasonable moment. The Biden team, they must have understood something that I didn't understand in agreeing to have a live CNN debate on June the 27th, when by tradition, presidential debates are not until the fall, and they needed not have one at all. I thought, well, they must understand something about the candidate's age. They must understand something about how this will play with the electorate that I, lowly me, I must not understand it. I have to trust in the mega orderers. Clearly, they understand things that I don't understand. Wouldn't have been the decision that I would have chosen. But shall we say, the emperor has no clothes, and his old age diapers were not changed. And it has now been revealed to the whole world. Joking aside, I never thought I would be in a position to wake up and see the op-ed page of the New York Times have Paul Krugman, Thomas Friedman, Bruni, the great and the good of the Democratic punditry all saying he has to step aside. And I have been on with Ezra Klein, and I believe that it was okay to have a brokered convention and get him out. But if we were going to do that, why agree to have this debate? This could be the greatest own goal in the history of Western democratic ordering. And I would assert a greater own goal than Cameron's decision to volunteer to have the referendum. But we didn't need to have this debate that now, even though we can replace Biden, we can replace him only from a point of weakness, with the sky absolutely falling. And this has knock-on effects for the NATO summit, for the ability to prosecute the war in Ukraine, to deter China over Taiwan, because this is an autocrat's wet dream. The emperor is shown to have no clothes, and no one has changed his old age diapers. They can take advantage of this. The disorderers are just loving it. I need to inject some optimism, and the only optimism that I could think of would have to come with a lovely female Glaswegian accent. So I'm very happy that at this last moment, we could be joined by our now frequent defending champion, Jane Kinnenmont. Oh, Jane. Oh, Jane, help me. Help me. I've fallen and I can't get up.
Hi, Jason. Well, what can I say that can help? At least there is now this live debate about maybe it's time to get a new candidate. Is that optimistic? Like you say, it's from a position of weakness, but it's not too late. I think I'm setting a low bar for optimism. I'm not sure I'm managing to cheer you up. I mean, I also feel bad because we need to be also talking about the other side of the debate and the fact that while one candidate looked weak, the other candidate was also telling a lot of fibs, we might say. To be honest, I read about the debate before I started to watch it. So when I read about it, I thought, yeah, sounds like you've got misspeaking and weakness on one side, but a lot of serious untruths on the other. But of course, it's when you watch it that you really see how the performance aspect of it is so critical, especially in this age where obviously most people are not watching the whole debate. They are watching the clips on social media, and it's so easy to find so many very, very bad ones, ones that you would wish you could say, this must be an AI generated fake, but no, it's actually real. It's just like, if you ever have any presentation training or sales training, people say to you, actually, people don't really care what you say. Maybe 7% of your communication is the words and the rest is how you look and how you sound. That is what we seem to have had in spades last night. There is a question as well, Jason, about how much the debate matters. Are people going to change their votes at this point? You tell me.
Jane, it does matter. If Starmer's huge victory could give Biden 1 to 2% in Minnesota and Michigan, and I stand by that, the debate matters of 5 to 7%. Over 50 million Americans watched it live, and that's more than 1/4 of registered voters, and it's more than 1/3 of people who will vote. Then nearly the whole country will have seen clips, And every media outlet in the world globally is having this as the main story. This is the most cataclysmic thing to happen to the case for global ordering in years. It's a bigger deal than the war in Gaza or Ukraine. It's a greater calamity than, say, if Iran does or doesn't do something or doesn't shoot missiles. This has moved the narrative and shaped the debate. The only hope is it was such a cataclysmic performance by Biden that he will, in fact, get substituted out. And the two people who matter on that front are Jill and former President Obama, because they can do an intervention. But before we come to that, of course, Trump made more than 100 lies in a 90-minute debate. He said that Democrats essentially are willing to kill and abort babies after they're born, that Democrats rip 9-month pregnant babies out of their mothers and kill them. Do you know what I mean? Literally insane lies. He said things about the economy that are fully not true. He lied about his own record and the economy under him as opposed to under Biden. But the key thing is the optics. He actually looked quite younger than the 78 years old that he is, or 76 or whatever. Biden looked a lot older than the 81 that he is. Biden looked like a ghost. Trump was kind of playful and funny. And when Biden had his senior moment and he said something about Medicaid when he didn't mean it, Trump then sees that and said, yes, you did beat Medicaid. Do you know what I mean? Because Trump was alive. Of course, everything that came out of his mouth was a lie, and he is a convicted felon and rapist. But because the debate was not fact-checked, it didn't hurt Trump that he made all those lies. It may have helped him because by being in that format, he could pass off as truths all these lies, and he made a complete alternative reality about both the economy, the migrant debate, the abortion debate. I cannot grasp, and this is what I'm going to stick on, how the Biden campaign would allow their candidate, if they knew his state, and he'd been prepping at Camp David for a week, to go on. And if they knew he had this cough, and they knew he wasn't up for it, and they knew that there were going to be no neutral fact checkers, that Dana Bash's role and Jake Tapper's role was not to fact check, merely just to cut them off after 2 minutes. How could they have allowed this to happen? I question their entire ability to run the campaign. So I think it's not just that we need to get rid of Biden. We need to actually get rid of the top Democratic fixering establishment and have a generalized elite in the Democratic Party, which is, people from Buttigieg to Whitmer to Obama's former people to lots of retired ambassadors. There needs to be a collective brain, in other words, a blob in the good sense, that makes this decision. It has to be taken away from the Biden people. They've now shown that they are not capable to lead us forward and to defend democracy and global order.
Yeah. I think that when we looked at the Trump versus Biden election last time round, Europeans had been looking at this race and asking themselves, what happened to the Republican Party? Why didn't they have more serious talent to bring to bear in this race? But this time round, Europeans have been having the same discussion about the Democrats, saying, how can it be that there isn't a viable alternative candidate being put forward? How can Biden be left with the apparent impression that he's the only person capable to beat Donald Trump? I think that the record of the Biden administration, like any administration, it's mixed. But I think from here in Europe, there's a common view that the administration has done a pretty smart and nuanced job in dealing with Ukraine and managing escalation with Russia, helping out with European security. And there is certainly, in most European countries, a strong preference for the Democrats to get through. But it's not much to do with Biden personally, and it's a lot to do with Trump.
Yes, of course. The view before the debate was what Ezra Klein has set out as the distinction between candidate Biden and President Biden. That President Biden has been on the right side about Ukraine. President Biden has dealt with inflation. President Biden has been quite strong on a lot of economic issues. Yes, maybe he could have handled migration a little differently. Some people might feel he was too soft on Netanyahu, but for the most part, he's been great. And candidate Biden has been a horrible explainer. But now what we saw changes that calculus. Because if someone needs to get woken up at 3 a.m. because the Chinese are moving on Taiwan, the man that we saw on that debate stage was in no position to be able to adjudicate between, say, Blinken and Sullivan if they have a difference of opinion on how things need to be handled vis-a-vis deterring Xi. And if, for example, there was a major terror attack or something went wrong in Ukraine or whatever, we did not see someone who can do the President Biden role, even if his only role is to pick among his appointees. So we need to talk about what this means for global order, as well as the mechanics, to unpack for our majority non-American audience. Do they understand what the brokered convention means? Do they understand what it means that the Ohio ballots have different rules than elsewhere and they need to have a name on these ballots? What are the mechanics now of doing this? And how do you see things?
Well, let me say a couple of points about the rest of the world, I think. Because I think we're really seeing the sheen come off American democracy for a lot of people. So, there is an election happening today. As we're recording this, the polls are about to close in Iran. And imagine that you are a young and relatively pro-Western Iranian, you're sitting in Tehran, you may or may not have voted. You have seen a choice between a bunch of old men who aren't going to change things greatly and the whole system being presided over by an aging cleric. Maybe in the past, maybe in the time of Obama, you would have thought, if only we could have something like the US. Right now, you probably don't think that. You don't have an obvious model. So I think this is one of the things that is quite interesting for democratization and authoritarianism around the world. People are not necessarily going to look at the US right now as what they want to be. They think there is too much influence of money, there's not enough talent. Why can't these guys get some women or young people in there? And that is a big long-term question. I think there'll be mixed feelings, probably, in Beijing and Moscow as well. Maybe there's interest in US weakness. There's a lot of concern everywhere about the disruptive potential of Donald Trump and the lack of predictability that would happen if he's the president. He will say that's a good thing to keep the tyrants on their toes. I'm not so sure that kind of madman theory is a good idea. But I'm not sure how much even America's adversaries will be super relieved by this beyond the obvious trolling that is going to happen on Russian and Chinese state media.
I don't think they have mixed feelings in Beijing and Moscow and Tehran. I think that they're licking their chops. And that's why I want to treat this from an ordering-disordering perspective. That we in the West don't have top-table unity and we have uncertainty going into November is exactly what they want. It allows them to get away with stuff in Ukraine or Lebanon or to threaten Taiwan or to understand that there isn't going to be coordinated and coherent industrial policy to deal with the threat from Chinese EVs. Trump's tariff plans are absurd. A 10% tax on foreign goods and 60% on certain Chinese goods. That's insane. It will cause inflationary spirals. It will cause people to lose their jobs. It's just exactly what a disorderer would want. Disorderers are going to love the uncertainty that the prolonged Biden-Trump debate brings and the uncertainty in global markets. That makes it impossible for people to gang up against China or to unite and have a coherent way of arming Ukraine. I mean, I just don't see any silver linings here. I think that the silver linings are for people who are sitting in Pyongyang and Tehran and are like, oh my God, those guys may have invented AI and invented the drone and invented the missile and invented the internet, but they don't know how to govern anything or to be on the same page. They're paper tigers. We can push them over.
So I agree with you. I think the uncertainty around the US election is a major issue. I've been worried also about what happens if you have some other kind of election dispute, that period between November and January might be a extremely good time for opportunistic aggression, for instance, by a country like North Korea, which does seem like it's waiting for its moment to do something. So it's not a good thing. I'm just not convinced that the tyrants around the world are necessarily delighted by Biden's weakness in terms of what it means for the next US leader. But yes, the uncertainty and division validates the arguments that Iranian hardliners would make that, the West is in decline and all of this. And it places more pressure on the rest of the world to work together to show a united front. That's especially important for Ukraine, where a lot of the support in terms of money and in terms of weapons needs to come from Europe. Europe has already had a taste of this because US political polarization and paralysis has already interrupted US assistance. It is a time where everyone has been worried about the US leaving a bit of a vacuum, and there's pressure on them to do much more.
I think it's good for disorderers everywhere. If you're in the disordering industries like the extractive and mining industries, you love that debate because the idea that there's going to be coherent regulations about carbon emissions or global ways of dealing with commodities traders, absolutely not. People are so on the back foot to even get the Dems to stay in power and have coherent policies about, Ukraine and inflation. Your little disordering patch is going to be much easier to maneuver in. And yes, I think that this is crucial to point out, which is that what the founders of America had said was that partisanship needs to end at the water's edge. And that was how America was going to do leadership in the world. And it mostly worked. We didn't have partisan politics towards Europe throughout the 19th century. We had consensus politics. We had consensus politics on the Cold War. Nixon opened up to China, but Dems would have opened up to China in a similar way, It's really a Reagan to present thing that foreign policy has become so partisan. And then with uber partisanship at home and uber uncertainty, it is that the binary of Dem-Republican changes everything from who's appointed to how crypto is regulated to whether we constrain the Iranians or whether we randomly, appease them. That is all thrown into chaos means we're going to be living through an age of unprecedented global disorder. And I want to say, Jane, I looked at yesterday as maybe the initiation of something like a new dark ages. That it started with June 23, 2016, having the referendum. And then if this goes wrong and Trump comes in for the second term, we saw that he's going to be so divorced from reality. He's going to be making narratives about droves of rapist terrorists coming from the Middle East through the Mexican border and calculating his policies based on that while giving tax cuts to the rich and abnegating any responsibility to regulate AI or carbon emissions. We're just going to live through a new dark ages where knowledge will only be preserved like in monasteries in illuminated manuscripts as the AIs just spew out, hatred and misinformation.
If you look back into the storytelling of the Dark Ages in Britain, there is this recurring motif of the fisher king, the wounded king who's in ill health, and while he's sick, the whole land falls into ruin and he can do nothing but fish, or maybe the modern version would be play golf. These problems, in many ways, they're global problems, but I think for much of the world, there is a sense that we can't stay so dependent forever on the electoral choices in, at the end of the day, a few states in the US. It makes a real difference now that foreign policy has become caught up in the polarization. And, why should the rest of the world be so disrupted by somebody's poor performance by US viewer standards on a US TV show? It doesn't add up. So there is a big wave of realization, I think, in different places about the need for a bit more self-reliance. The strategic autonomy discussion in Europe is all kind of based on that, but it's having to take place too quickly. We're talking about making a long-term transition to be less dependent on a US that is no longer as central in the world economy as it used to be, but it's happening in this kind of panicky and disrupted way.
Of course, Ursula von der Leyen and Macron and Scholz need to push forward having a European army, and they needed to do it before, and they should get their fucking asses in gear. But there's another thing going on here, which is that who is really going to lead the free world? And I think it's Starmer. He comes in on July 5th, and he is looking like the new kid on the block with mojo. And yeah, he's got weaknesses and some things he could have done a little better in this campaign, but it's got to be him. After the break, we discuss, is it always darkest before the dawn? Could the Dems actually benefit from Biden doing so badly they sub him out? So let's order the disorder, Jane. This is just an emergency cast because it is a bloody fucking emergency. The sky is falling. I don't think that we should be in this position. One, I've advocated for the brokered convention and the Ezra Klein scenario for a long time. You know, I've thought that it would have been good if the Dems had said, and Biden had said after the victory at the 2022 midterms, I'm merely a bridge candidate. I'm going to step down. We have a year and a half to deal with getting a non-Kamala Harris replacement for me because she's not polling well. Then, when the primaries started, he obviously encouraged people, real insiders in the party, to not run, which is why Dean Phillips is the only one who ran, and Dean Phillips is a nobody. The Gretchen Whitmers and Amy Klobuchars and Shapiros were kept from running. Then the campaign people could have prevented there from being this debate. They obviously wanted to have this debate in the late spring, early summer, which is entirely unprecedented. It's a debate before the convention. In other words, it's a debate when they're not even nominees yet. Makes no sense because they thought they were going to win. But they disordered the disorder. What can now be done to order the disorder? The only thing that I think that can be done is the intervention of Jill Biden and Obama, saying all of the major pundits, they all say that you need to step down. Even if you could have had a better performance if you didn't have a cold and your voice wasn't raspy, we're really sorry. We need you to step down now. What concerns me is how to have this done in a way where the American public feel that it wasn't cooked and that they feel that they're included in the process. I'm going to send out a link in the show notes to friend of the podcast, Jamie Metzel's group email. He's going to be on the pod in the end of the month. His great book, Super Convergence, has just come out. And he says we need a series of town hall meetings, a kind of very quick proto-primary, which CNN and MSNBC can have live versions of this. People can vote in. They can go to different states. And then it has to be done at an open convention in a way where state delegations get to have input. And it's not just people in smoke-filled rooms. I think that is now the only way to order the disorder. And Biden should say, I've been a patriot my whole life. I've worked for more than 50 years in the service of the American people. The only reason I ran in 2020 after my son was killed and I didn't want to run in 2016 was to prevent democracy and Western ordering from collapsing. I did it to prevent that. I now know that my continuing to run puts at risk democracy and Western-led global order. I'm stepping aside. Please bear with us as we go through this transition. This is all in the best interest of freedom, democracy, the environment, and good jobs for Americans.
One of the tragic things about almost all politicians is that they do not know when to go. I think part of the job has to be that you have this extreme self-belief that you are the man or the woman for the job. And usually you are pushed out by the election or by term limits or by people in your own party. And I agree with you. I think this needs to come from Biden, given the position that he's in, but persuading him is going to be a big deal. Nelson Mandela is one of the very few exceptions who actually said, I'm aging now, it's time to retire. But almost always it is forced upon people.
Well, I want to quote Alex Hall here. She is just waking up in the States as we're recording. And she says, I watched it all, have just written my article for it, Byline Times, and we're going to put that in the show notes as well. Biden's family and advisors are criminally culpable for colluding and covering up the state of his incapacity. I'm furious at the Democratic Party for indulging this. Alex, that was brilliantly put. Couldn't have said it better. They are bloody culpable, and I can't believe that I slightly believed the cover-up. In other words, I wanted them to switch him out, but I believed that he was in a better state than this because I was hoodwinked. However, I then want to pivot. There's something unique about America. At the time that we became a republic in the 1770s and 1780s, there were no major republics globally. Maybe only Sardinia was a republic at that time. And George Washington set what is called the Cincinnatus example. And that's why we have a city, Cincinnati, and the Society of the Cincinnatus, because he didn't run for a third term. And he said, I'm not going to run for a third term because I don't want this to become a new elected kingship. The whole point is we're not going to be like those European monarchs. We're not going to handle the succession problem the way that they do. We're going to have like a merit-based succession, and we're not going to let power be so consolidated, hence all the checks and balances. So Biden just needs to get up there and say, I'm Cincinnatus. I should have gone to my farm earlier, but no worries, better late than never. And to properly order the disorder, Jane, do you have thoughts about Widmer, Shapiro, Gavin Newsom, Klobuchar, before I give mine, to give people some optimism? Can this play out well?
There is a scenario where this could be done really elegantly, and it could be done in the style of a leader setting aside his own ego and handing over to the next generation, and maybe handing over to somebody who could be the first woman president. That would be kind of amazing to see. Maybe it would also have been easier if they'd chosen a different vice president in the first place. They've ended up with a vice president that nobody wants to be the president, which has made this position much worse. But I think there's an elegant way to do it. It could be done rather beautifully. I've got little to say really to weigh up the candidates, so I'm going to leave that to you.
Okay. I've always liked Amy Klobuchar. You know, she's from that Scandinavian North element. She's a moderate centrist. She's not on the woke AOC end of the party. She's just a clean, middle-of-the-road, normal communicator, and she has good folksy vibes. People really like Sherrod Brown of Ohio, that he's like a little bit more on the center-left of the party. I like Buttigieg. He was at Oxford in our days, Jane. I love his Maltese ancestry and that he's Catholic and he's technocratic and he's very, very dynamic. And, you know, he's very international. He's probably the most international in outlook. Gavin Newsom is a slick operator. You know, he's extremely handsome. He's a great debater. He would have killed Trump and made fun of him and attacked him for his lies and all of that. He's unfortunately tainted by coming from California with the dysfunction that California has a lot of bureaucratic regulations and it have very high taxes and stuff, but that's not what he chose. That's what he inherited. I still think he'd be good. I believe that Gretchen Whitmer is the most likely. So I just want to get that out there. You heard it here first. Gretchen Whitmer is the most likely because she is a woman, because she pulls better than Harris with people. She's not on the woke identity politics side of things, which Kamala Harris is, I think, unfairly associated with, but coming from a minority background and her whole thing about busing and whatever in the initial debates against Biden in 2020. So I think that Whitmer is the one who's most likely to get it and that she would be amazing. But a Newsom-Whitmer ticket, I'm worried about having a Jewish Democratic candidate like Shapiro, who is being mooted a lot. Like if you listen to Ezra Klein today, the centrists are feeling that Shapiro is maybe better positioned than Whitmer. I don't love that given the optics. So yeah, you heard it here first. And hopefully the Whitmer-Newsom campaign is coming to a ballot box near you. And it's really got to get in motion so that it is in play before the convention and that all of the ballots and stuff are ready so that we're not going to be behind the eight ball, for example, for the deadline to get the candidates registered for the Ohio ballot deadlines. So as depressed as I am, as much as I feel that the sky is falling, and as much as I feel that I'm so incontinent, I just can't hide it, and so catatonic, it cannot be concealed. As bad as that all is, it's always darkest before the dawn, and hopefully things can pick up from here. But I do believe if they just run Biden, global order is toast. Time to buy farmland in New Zealand.
Things can only get better.
Oh, it sounds better with the Scottish accent. May I say, things, they can only get better.
That sounds kind of Russian. But, you know, I appreciate what you did there.
As always, our producer has been the one, the only, the mega ordering George McDonough. Our executive producer is Neil Fern. If you want to find out more about the primaries and the convention and how Biden can be subbed out, follow the links in the show notes, subscribe to our Substack. I'm going to be writing a lot about that there. We hope you have an orderly week, and we have some really great episodes coming up for you soon on the British election, which has turned out to be actually quite orderly in comparison. I love these proper Brits. They actually know how to run a decent election.